Hello, Selamat Hari Raya to everyone. Hope you're enjoying this break. In the previous lesson, we were talking about the structure of the heart as well as the blood vessels. So let's continue from there. Alright, let's talk about the pulse. So what is a pulse? A pulse is produced after every ventricular contraction as the heart pumps the blood. Right, this means that your both ventricles, the left and the right ventricle, when they contract together, that produces a high blood pressure. It pushes the blood towards the arteries, and that is the pulse that we feel in the arteries. Okay, so we can count number of pulse beats per minute, and then we'll get the number of heartbeats per minute. So for healthy human beings, right, the pulse rate can vary considerably. It usually is from like 60 to 100, around there. Right, I think most of us, our pulse rate should be around like 60 to 70 if you're healthy. Okay, and some healthy people, like athletes, they have trained their heart so much that their pulse rate is even lower than normal, because their heart is so strong. So one of their beats can be worth like average person's 2 beats, that kind of thing. So their pulse rate tends to be lower. Just want to try this with you, okay, so you can test your own pulse. So this is called taking your radial pulse. The radial pulse is found on your wrist, right? So you can choose either your left or your right, depending on if you're left-handed or right-handed, and you just feel it, right? Usually we will count for 30 seconds to avoid less error, and then we will multiply it by 2. So usually a pulse is always the number of pulses per minute. Okay, so 15 seconds will need to times 4 lah, to get to 1 minute. And you can estimate for yourself, right? Or you can try it for yourself. What will happen if you do physical exercise, maybe do some jumping jacks, do some push-ups, and then you measure your pulse rate again. Okay, so we can even do some data analysis. Okay, so it's quite obvious, right? Your pulse will definitely increase as you are exercising, and that is because when you're exercising, your cells need more energy, and so it increases the rate of respiration, and therefore you will need to pump more blood around the body. Your breathing rate also increases so that you can have more oxygen in your body for a higher rate of respiration. Okay, how long does it take to return to normal? It depends on person to person. Some people who are healthy, they exercise and within a few minutes they're back to normal, but others, they take a longer time. Okay, so yeah, exercising regularly is important because this trains our heart muscles and allows our heart muscles to become stronger. Let's talk about pressure changes in the heart. So this graph shows the changes in pressure in the left side of the heart. Okay, so focusing purely on this left ventricle and the left atria over here. Okay, the reason why is because this area is where it's heading towards the aorta, and so that's a bit more important lah. At least to doctors and scientists, this one is kind of a important area. Let's talk about it step by step. Alright, so step 1. There is a slight increase in ventricular pressure due to the contraction of the left atrial muscle, forcing blood into the ventricle. So let's look at this graph over here. This graph says time on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis it says pressure in mm of mercury. Okay, this is the traditional way of measuring pressure using mercury. And so when this left atrium it contracts, you will see it represented by this bump over here. Right, this bump in green, right, represents that pressure because of the blood flowing in towards the left ventricle. Okay, the line in green is the pressure in the ventricle, the line in blue is the pressure in atria, and the line in red is the pressure in aorta. I'll explain why is that later. Okay, so the blood goes into the left ventricle, and then now we go towards number 2. The ventricular muscles begin to contract, and the bicuspid valve closes. Right, the bicuspid valve is this one over here. So remember, 3 first, tri, then bi. So 3 on the right, and then bi on the left. Okay, so the reason why the valve closes also is to prevent backflow from the ventricle towards the atrium. And so now the pressure rises. You can see that it's going up. The pressure is rising. And at point number 3, the ventricular muscles continue to contract without change in volume of blood. Pressure continues to rise. Okay, so the muscles are contracting, they're squeezing, and this is forcing the pressure in this area, the ventricles, to increase. Eventually, it gets to step 4. And this is the point where the pressure in the ventricles becomes higher than that in the aorta. The aortic valve, which is also known as a semilunar valve in the aorta, opens. The volume of blood in the ventricle decreases as blood is forced out into the aorta. So you see here that this is the point where the red line intersects with the green line, right? And this is the point where the valve, the aortic valve, will open up. The blood will flow into the aorta, which is why the line in the red also increases up. So this is actually the blood going into the aorta. And then once the aorta is full, then it reaches the peak, and then start to go down and talk about number 5. So number 5, the ventricular muscles begin to relax. Drop in pressure causes aortic valve to close and prevent backflow of blood into the ventricle. So after the blood has moved through the aorta, right here, then this aortic valve is going to close, right, to prevent any blood from going back into the left ventricle. Okay, so that's why we see over here the pressure is dropping. The pressure is dropping in both the aorta as well as in the ventricle. And then point number 6, the ventricular muscles continue to relax without change in volume of blood. Alright, so then the bicuspid valves will open when pressure in the ventricles become lower than that in the atrium. Okay, and that's represented by point number 7. You see that the pressure in the atrium is slightly higher than the pressure in the ventricle, so blood can flow into the ventricles once more. Okay, so the pressure in the ventricle rises as blood continues to enter the ventricle from the atrium. So what should you be careful in these kind of graphs? Firstly, you need to be aware of where the points of intersection are. So this point where the green intersects the red, this is the point where the aortic valve or the semilunar valve in the aorta will open up. And at this point, this is the point where this valve will open, right? The bicuspid valve. Same for okay, yeah, this is the point where bicuspid valve open. And okay, this whole thing happens over and over, right? There is a cycle, and this whole thing repeats. Okay, so it's one cycle, then it happens again in the next cycle. Okay, so you can also measure the time taken for one heartbeat to for one ventricular systole to happen by counting. Like if there is some numbers, right? Imagine there's some numbers at the bottom, and it's like 0.1 here, 0.4 here. Then you just need to take the number 0.4 minus with the smaller number with 0.1 to get you like 0.3, which is the time taken for this ventricular systole to happen. The time taken will be from right at the bottom here, where the pressure starts to increase and goes all the way to the point of this intersection. This is the point where the blood has entered into the aorta and then it's moving away already. Okay, so it's moving through the aorta, and that's why the pressure is decreasing in both the ventricles and the aorta. Okay, this graph needs a bit of analysis, so take some time, read through it, and try to understand. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, let's talk about the main blood vessels through which the heart pumps blood. And these are basically just like some names for you to know. Okay, the arteries that are leaving the heart. Okay, let's just get straight into it. Okay, so let's talk about the ones that we already know. So we know that our heart, right, is gonna pump blood through the aorta. The aorta is one of the largest arteries in our body. It's about the size of a garden hose. Right, and these will eventually split up into the various arteries. Right, firstly, we talk about the hepatic artery. Hepatic means having to do with the liver. So this artery supplies blood, oxygenated blood to the liver, right? And then there's this hepatic vein, right, which is removing the deoxygenated blood as well as the other nutrients, right, that has come through the hepatic portal vein, right? Maybe it's been processed in the liver. Some of the excess amino acids has been deaminated. Maybe some glucose, right, is now moving through the hepatic vein, and it can flowing back through the vena cava. Okay, and then arteries to the small intestine. These are just called intestinal arteries, so nothing special. Then we have the renal artery. Renal means having to do with kidneys. Okay, and then the renal vein. which is also the vein that is bringing the deoxygenated blood away from the kidneys and back towards the heart. Okay, and we know that the kidneys are very important for excretion and also for cleaning of blood. And what else is important here? Definitely this one. Okay, we have the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. So the word pulmonary means having to do with the lungs, and so these are two special ones. These are the only two arteries and veins which are kind of the opposite of every other artery and vein. The pulmonary artery, it carries deoxygenated blood away from the heart and towards the lungs, whereas the pulmonary vein is carrying oxygenated blood back towards the heart. Now remember the word artery. The word artery simply means carrying blood away from the heart, and the word vein means carrying blood towards the heart. Okay, so don't get confused even though you see like, yeah, it's red or blue. Just focus on whether it's going away or towards. There are definitely arteries and veins that are connected to our necks, our heads, our forearms, but we don't have to know the name for those. Okay, so kind of already talked about this, right? Let's just see if we miss anything out. Alright, we talked about the pulmonary veins bringing blood from the lungs to the left atrium of the heart, the vena cava, right, bringing blood back towards the right atrium. Okay, there's two vena cava. One is for the upper half of your body, one is for the lower half of your body, and both of them will bring blood back to your heart. So I consider them just similar function. Same function actually, just different area. Okay, just read through this yourself. Okay, something to highlight here will be our hepatic portal vein. So this hepatic portal vein, it is connected towards from our small intestine, right? All the small capillaries or the villi with the capillaries, right? They will combine into a big vein called the hepatic portal vein, transporting all the glucose and amino acids through the hepatic portal vein towards our liver, where it can then be further processed. The word portal, right, just in case you want to know, it means carrying blood from one capillary network towards another. Okay, alright, let's do some quick practice. State two features of the heart which enables it to function efficiently. Okay, so we've got to talk about the thickness of the muscles on the left versus the right. Okay, then talk about the valves, etc. etc. Place the following parts in the circulatory system correctly in the sequence in which blood will flow through them. Take the liver as a starting point. Okay, alright, so if it's from the liver, right, so liver, then the hepatic vein, right, back towards the vena cava, then back towards the heart, then going up to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries, then back towards the heart through the pulmonary veins, then left atrium, left ventricle, and then aorta. They never mentioned, I forgot to mention all the different valves, etc. Okay, talk about question 3. Question 3 says, patient has hole in the heart wall, the two atria. The pressure in the left atrium is higher than right atrium. Blood flows through the hole mostly from left to right. What problems might this cause? Okay, so when when there's a hole in the septum, right, either on the left atrium or over on the ventricles, then this will cause mixing of deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood, right? The oxygenated blood here will mix back with the deoxygenated blood over here, and this will cause weakness, right? You don't have enough oxygen in your body, fainting spells, like you feel very tired, and eventually it can even lead to death if the hole is too big. Okay, most of the time the hole should be small, but if it's too big, then a surgeon will need to patch up the hole or do some kind of surgery, heart transplant. Okay, coronary heart disease. Okay, coronary heart disease. This is an important one. Alright, do you know that about 1 in 4 people in Singapore, right, have the risk of coronary heart diseases or other diseases related to this kind of blockages in the arteries? Okay, so what is a coronary heart disease? It is the occlusion, which means the blockage of coronary arteries, and listing the possible causes such as unhealthy diet, sedentary lifestyle, smoking, and stating the preventive measures. Okay, let's watch a quick video on heart attack.
Heart attack, also known as a myocardial infarction, is one of the leading causes of death in many parts of the world. "25% of all heart attacks can occur without warning signs. Symptoms of heart attack include chest discomfort, shortness of breath, lightheadedness, and nausea. If you think you're having a heart attack, call 995 for ambulance. Rest, sit, or lie down. Do not drive or try to get to the hospital by yourself. As heart attack occurs when the flow of blood to the heart is blocked, it is vital to restore blood flow to the heart as soon as possible. The door to balloon time, or the time between the patient arriving at the hospital and receiving treatment, is crucial for good outcomes.
When heart attack happens, it is very important to quickly administer treatment to open up the blocked arteries and minimize the extent of damage to the heart muscles. We will first perform a test called coronary angiogram. This is to detect narrowings in the arteries of the heart. A wire and a small flexible tube will then be inserted from the wrist or groin through a blood vessel towards the heart. Dye will then be injected to make the arteries look more visible on the X-ray images. Moving images of the arteries will then be taken using X-ray. Once the blockage is identified, we may follow up with another procedure called coronary angioplasty. This is to open up the blocked artery. During angioplasty, a specially made balloon is placed on a wire that is passed into the narrow or blocked coronary artery. The balloon is then inflated, enlarging the narrow segment. A metal mesh called a stent is then placed at the site of the narrowing to keep the blood vessel open. Rest assured that the patient will not feel any pain during the procedures that we do for you.
At the National Heart Centre, Singapore, emergency angioplasty for patients who are admitted for heart attack is available around the clock. After a heart attack episode, a cardiac rehabilitation program, diet modification and medication can help a patient gradually resume a normal lifestyle and reduce the risk of another heart attack. Together with the guidance of a doctor and a team of dedicated healthcare professionals, patients who've had a heart attack can still lead a healthy and fulfilling life.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens during heart attack. Okay, so in the video we saw a man experiencing some chest pain, which is the most common sign of a heart attack. It can happen to old people as well as to young people, so don't think that just because we're young we are going to avoid heart attack. It can happen, especially if we don't take care of our health. And many people suffer from heart attack every day. I think like almost 1/3 of the deaths in Singapore is related or having to do with heart attack or similar diseases, heart diseases. Okay, so there are many different types of heart diseases, but the most common one is this one called coronary heart disease. So what is coronary? Coronary means having to do with our hearts. And the coronary arteries, they lie outside the heart and they branch out from the aorta. So as you can see here, as blood goes up from the left ventricle towards the aorta, some of the blood actually goes back down towards the these coronary arteries, which supply the heart with blood. So this blood supply to the heart muscles is very important, because of two things. Firstly, the heart muscles are contracting, to contract they need energy, and so without the oxygen, without the glucose required for respiration, they cannot generate enough energy, and therefore they will stop beating, and then you get a heart attack. Okay, so it happens because of these blockages, the blockages in the coronary arteries, and this whole thing is called a heart attack. Let's take a look at this blockage. So in a normal artery, the lumen is generally about medium, right? Not super big as compared to the vein, but it's about medium size. It's a normal size. You can see the thick muscular walls, right? The elastic walls, everything. And that's what happens during abnormal artery. Okay, when we eat too much food that's high in cholesterol or high in fats, then these fatty deposits can be stored inside the arteries itself, right? It forms this hard layer called a plaque, right? This layer called a plaque. Plaque is like basically just like fatty substances that are very hard, right? And then it blocks up the arteries, and it reduces the size of the lumen. And so when this happens, firstly, the blood pressure increases in our body, because as you know, right, when there's a big hole, right, like this, then the blood can flow smoothly, so the blood pressure is quite normal. But as the hole gets smaller and smaller, the blood pressure will increase. Okay, what happens during a heart attack? During a heart attack, the blood flow to a particular part of the heart may be completely blocked. Due to the blood flow, that part of the heart does not receive sufficient oxygen and nutrients. That region of the heart muscle dies. Extensive heart damage often is fatal, as the heart is no longer able to pump blood to the various parts of the body. Okay, so how does that happen? Okay, so the heart attack can occur at any of these arteries, right? It could be maybe right at the bottom. So imagine that if there's a blockage right over here, anything that is lower than it will then be affected, and this whole area of the heart will die. But worst case is the blockage happens right at the top, right? If it's right at the top or right over here, then this entire area is all blocked, right? It's just like imagine like a river. If the top of the river is blocked, then everything downstream is going to be affected. So once the heart does not have enough oxygen and glucose, it cannot perform respiration, then it will die. Okay, so what is the cause of coronary heart disease? It's because of fatty substances such as cholesterol and saturated fats that are deposited into the coronary arteries. Okay, what is cholesterol? Cholesterol is something similar to fat. It's not exactly the same as fat, but it's found mainly in the diet, right? In certain high cholesterol foods such as maybe eggs or even seafood. Not that it's wrong. Cholesterol is actually an important part of our body also. We need a bit of cholesterol. So you can't say that you don't eat any cholesterol at all, right? You need to just control the amount. Then saturated fats. Right? Saturated fats is a kind of more, there are different types of fats also, and saturated fat is generally termed as a unhealthier fat. Although, like, you know, in everything in life, moderation is important. Okay, so when these substances are deposited into the arteries, this is known as arteriosclerosis. The word arterial means artery, and the word sclerosis means hardening. So, hardened artery. This narrows the lumen of the arteries, increases blood pressure, and the affected arteries have a rough inner surface, increasing the risk of a blood clot being formed in the artery. And why does this happen? Okay, so imagine, right, that there's all these fatty deposits, right? Even though the lumen is narrow, right, there's still some blood flowing through, But imagine one day suddenly this whole thing like burst and collapse, right? When there's a burst, our platelets will come in and they form a blood clot, right? They form this blood clot and it completely jams up the entire thing. So now this whole thing is completely blocked, 100%, and then nothing can flow through. And that's where the worst kind of heart attack will happen. Okay, so right, blood oxygen cut off, and without oxygen for aerobic respiration, no energy, right? Then the heart muscles will be damaged, heart attack will occur. Okay, this is a real picture, right, of artery with fatty deposits clogging up and blocking the lumen. Okay, so what are the main risk factors in heart disease? Smoking. Okay, so smoke contains carbon monoxide and nicotine, and these two chemicals can increase the risk of coronary heart disease. Nicotine will increase blood pressure and the risk of blood clotting in the arteries. And the risk of smokers developing coronary heart disease is much higher than non-smokers. Okay, so you might be wondering, like, why, right? How does it work? The nicotine causes blood clots. It thickens your blood. And so when your blood is thicker, your blood pressure goes up. When the blood pressure goes up, right, there's more damage right, towards the coronary arteries, there's a higher chance of this blood clot happening. And so once a blood clot happens, then it will become 100% blocked. Unhealthy diet, right? Food that are high in cholesterol or saturated fats and salt will increase the risk of high blood pressure and heart attack. Okay, I think I've talked about cholesterol and fat a bit already, so let's talk about salt. As you know, salt has this osmosis property, right, or this tendency to kind of like attract water towards itself, right, because of it lowers the water potential. So you might have heard of things like water retention in the body, right? Basically, it means that when the salt, there's too much salt in your blood, right, your blood there's more water that's retained into your blood, and there's overall a higher blood pressure. Okay, so high blood pressure is dangerous also because it increases the chances of a blood clot happening. Genetic factors, right? So perhaps some races are a bit more genetically predisposed to it. So some families, right, the high blood pressure and high blood cholesterol can run in the family. Okay, the reason why high blood cholesterol, can run in the family is because our body makes cholesterol itself also. Besides consuming food, some of the cholesterol is made in our own body. And like I said, cholesterol is important for our health and for our general state of life. So it's not wrong, but we need to be careful. So if you know that perhaps your parents or grandparents have this kind of risk, then you must take more care and exercise more so that you can avoid or lower down the risk of this. Okay, age. As people grow older, right, the chances of suffering from coronary heart disease also increases. Okay, this is something that is unavoidable. Everyone has to age, right? However, everybody can also exercise and keep healthy to reduce the risk of coronary heart disease. Lastly, a sedentary lifestyle means a lifestyle where the person is not exercising or is not active. So this will lead to build-up of fatty deposits that will block the arteries, and this also increases the risk of coronary heart disease. Okay, so you should be able to think of some ways to reduce the risk factor, right? So let's talk about the ways to reduce risk factor. Okay, we'll talk about it later. Okay, so how do we reduce the risk of coronary heart disease? Firstly, a healthy diet to reduce the risk of arteriosclerosis. Animal fats can be substituted with polyunsaturated plant fats. Okay, and these kind of fats, they tend not to stick to the inner surface of the arteries. So we should also reduce the amount of cholesterol in our diet, right? Eat less seafood, eat less fatty meats, etc. Smoking is harmful and should be avoided. Okay, it's not known to say anymore. And regular exercise, right? It not only strengthens your heart, it also helps to maintain the elasticity of the arterial wall. So as you exercise, there's that increase in your heart rate, so that increases the stretchiness of your arteries. Okay, of course, don't over exercise to the point where you start to become injured or start to lose too much weight. Right, that'll be also not good. Okay, let's talk about this thing about medication, right? So there's medication that can reduce cholesterol. I'm sure that many of you might know someone who is taking medication. This thing called a stent. A stent is like a little metal tube that can be injected or placed by the surgeon into the coronary arteries, and this will inflate, and then it will help to hold the artery open. Okay. Yeah. Let's look at the real anatomy of the heart. Okay. So here we have like a human dissection. Right. If you're not comfortable with it, you can pause the video. But I think it's not quite normal, right? It's already all all dried up and all already.
So in front of me, I have a human heart. Now you're going to notice a couple things about it right off the bat.
Okay, so firstly, you can see this is the human heart, right? It's a real human heart, right? It's donated to science for research and stuff like that. Okay, right here you can see the coronary arteries. There are two main groups of coronary artery. One for the left side of the heart, one for the right side of the heart over here. Right? If either of them are blocked, right, or there's some kind of damage to the arteries, then that can cause heart disease.
Now, first off, we've made a couple incisions.
Okay, so here we see the left ventricle, right? Compare the thickness of the wall, right? Look at how thick this left ventricle is compared to the right ventricle wall, And why is it so thick? It's because the left ventricle is pumping blood towards the aorta, and the aorta is leading to the rest of the body. So like it requires much more force to push the blood from the heart all the way down to the extremities, your fingers, your toes, and your head. Right? It's much further as compared to the right ventricle, which is only pumping blood towards the lungs, which is quite near towards the heart itself.
You can see that I've been able to look into the left ventricle here, as well as the right ventricle. And this is just so we could see inside these awesome cavities and also see the thickness of the muscular wall, which you can see that this left ventricular wall is much thicker than this right ventricular wall. But if we're going to learn how blood travels through the heart, we have to start right here in the right atrium. So maybe it's best to start like this. This side is going to be the right side of the heart, and then this is going to be the left side. The right side is deoxygenated, and the left side is going to be oxygenated. There's two upper portions called the atria, and then there's two lower portions called the ventricles. The atria are what gather blood coming from pretty much everywhere else in the body on the right side, and the left atrium gathers it coming back from the lungs once it gathered oxygen. So this right here.
Okay, so what do you think this area is? Right? Yep, that's right. That's the vena cava, right? That's leading in towards the right atria.
Is that right atrium? This would be gathering blood coming from your head, your lower body, your arms, literally everywhere, including the heart muscle itself. All the blood that's been used and is now deoxygenated is going to pool into that right atrium. When that right atrium contracts, it's going to push its blood through this valve right here.
Okay, what valve is this? Do you remember? Alright, that's the tricuspid valve.
Called the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. This right ventricle will then contract, and it's going to...
Okay, so where is it going to go next? That's right, it's going to go towards the pulmonary arteries. And what's that valve? You can call it as the pulmonary valve, or you can call it the semilunar valve in the pulmonaries. Yeah, I can't remember. Semilunar valve for pulmonaries.
Push it through. It's kind of hard to tell, but this should be more tubular. We've cut it in order for you to see this valve here, called the pulmonary valve. But this tubular structure is called the pulmonary trunk. And this would then go on and branch out into blood vessels that would permeate the lungs. So it's going to go ahead and get oxygen. And when it comes back, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to go into this left atrium. Once it goes from the left atrium into its next spot, it's going through this valve here.
What valve is this? That's right, it's the bicuspid valve.
Called the mitral valve.
Ah, yes, there's another name for it, but you can ignore this, right? It's very hard to remember. So just call it bicuspid, tricuspid.
We are now inside the left ventricle, which when this contracts, will now push it out this chest.
Ah, there we go. So what is this? This is your aorta. It's pretty big, right?
Gigantic blood vessel here called the aorta. And this is the biggest blood vessel in the body. This is about the size of a garden hose. Now, the way I've always taught it, when we're discussing how the heart works, at least in terms of delivering blood, it's best to think of it with the analogy of an airplane experiencing an issue with cabin pressure.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit.
Here's that distressful black. Two of these coronary arteries start getting...
Here we're going to focus on the heart attack, right? So what causes a heart attack, right? Basically, there's a occlusion or blockage inside of these coronary arteries. It could happen right at the top or somewhere in the middle or at the bottom, right? The higher it is, right, the more dangerous it can become.
Blocked up with cholesterol, plaque, or maybe even a blood clot that is dislodged from somewhere else in the body, traveled into these coronary arteries, plugged one up, and started causing a blockage, preventing oxygen and blood from getting to the tissue. This causes necrosis, or tissue death.
Necrosis means death, cell death.
When we say myocardial infarction, we're talking the muscle of the heart is experiencing tissue death due to a lack of oxygen. Now, depending on which coronary artery is going to get the blockage, you're going to have different issues with the heart attack. Right? You see, the heart, at least the ventricles, beat from the bottom up. It does that in order to push the blood out of the heart. So if you have a heart attack down here, you're going to have a real difficult time pushing the blood out because these cells are now dead. Again, myocardial cells, cardiac muscle.
Okay, you can go and watch this video yourself because my video is getting quite long. So anyway, let's go back to this part over here. You can read through all this mind map yourself and also do the practice questions. You can also start to do the theory workbook, right, all the way until 6E. And with that, that's kind of the end of the chapter. Alright, good job. We'll see you back in school. Also remember to do the let's review. Okay, bye.